Moxley sparks AEW shock. Tony Khan reacts shockingly. New Day AEW rumors grow. Backstage buzz explodes. AEW fans go wild. What if Jon Moxley just casually walked into a conversation with Tony Khan and dropped a name that instantly changed the mood in the entire AEW locker room? And what if that name wasn't just any name, but the New Day? Because if even half of what's being whispered backstage is true, then we might be looking at one of the most unexpected wrestling twists in years. But the real question is this actually happening, or is the internet doing what it does best, turning a spark into a wildfire? Now, picture this for a second. You're backstage in AEW. The atmosphere is already unpredictable. You've got chaos in one corner, strategy in another, and Jon Moxley somewhere in the middle looking like he hasn't slept properly in a week but still knows exactly what's going on. That's the guy we're talking about here. A man who doesn't really hint things. He just says things, and somehow those things end up echoing through the entire wrestling world. And now his name is tied to the New Day possibly entering AEW. Yeah, take a moment with that. Because the New Day isn't just a tag team. It's not just three guys doing comedy in matches. It's Kofi Kingston, Xavier Woods, and Big E, three personalities that have defined an entire era of tag team wrestling in WWE. So when fans hear the New Day and AEW in the same sentence, it doesn't just sound like a rumor. It sounds like a disruption waiting to happen. But here's where things get interesting. The story floating around isn't that the New Day has signed anything. Not yet. Not officially. Instead, what's being talked about is Jon Moxley allegedly bringing the idea up in conversation with Tony Khan. Now whether that means a casual mention, a serious suggestion, or one of those locker room what-if moments that spirals out of control, that's where the mystery starts building. And Tony Khan's reaction? That's the part people can't stop talking about. Some say he didn't say much. Others claim he leaned in immediately, like the idea alone was enough to make him start mentally rearranging the AEW tag division. And honestly, can you blame him? You don't just ignore a name like the New Day. Even the possibility of them stepping into AEW would shake up the entire wrestling conversation online. But let's slow down for a second because this is where fans sometimes run too fast with things. We've seen this before. One whisper becomes a post. One post becomes a thread. One thread becomes confirmed reports, and suddenly everyone's acting like entrance themes are already being played at AEW Dynamite. It happens every time. And if you're watching this thinking, yeah, but this one feels different, that's exactly how every rumor starts feeling right before it disappears or evolves into something completely unexpected. Still, Jon Moxley is not your average messenger. This is the same guy who's walked through glass, through chaos, through title wars, through eras of wrestling most people wouldn't survive mentally. So when his name gets attached to something like this, even indirectly, people pay attention. Not because he's saying it's happening, but because he's the kind of person who doesn't bring up names without understanding the weight behind them. And the New Day? Their weight is massive. Think about it. If they ever stepped into AEW, it wouldn't just be a debut. It would be a cultural moment in wrestling. The crowd reaction alone would probably shake the building. You'd have fans cheering, others in disbelief, and online discourse going absolutely insane within seconds. And let's be real for a second. AEW's tag division would instantly get a jolt of energy. You already have stacked teams, no doubt about it. But adding the New Day into that mix? That's like dropping a wild card into an already unpredictable game. You're suddenly looking at dream matches that fans have joked about for years but never seriously expected. And that's where Tony Khan's supposed reaction becomes even more interesting. Because if he really did take the idea seriously, it says something about where AEW is right now creatively. It says they're still in that mindset of, if it's possible, we at least talk about it. And whether that leads anywhere or not, the fact that the conversation even exists is enough to get fans talking for days. Now let's pause for a second and talk about something that doesn't get enough attention in these kinds of rumors. Jon Moxley doesn't really operate like a guy who throws out fantasy booking ideas just for fun. He's more of a this makes sense or it doesn't kind of person. So if he even brought up the New Day in a serious tone, or even half serious, it makes you wonder what angle he was looking at. Was it competition? Was it storytelling? Was it just him saying, hey, imagine what we could do with these guys in this environment? Because that's the part fans don't see. Behind all the chaos, there are always conversations about possibilities. Sometimes they go nowhere. Sometimes they turn into the biggest moments in wrestling. And AEW is built on that exact kind of unpredictability. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room either. The New Day are still closely tied to WWE history. Years of stories, championships, moments that fans grew up watching. So even the idea of them stepping into AEW isn't just about logistics. It's emotional for fans. It feels like watching a piece of wrestling history potentially shift companies. And that's why the reaction online has been so divided. Some fans are already fantasy booking dream matches like it's confirmed. Others are rolling their eyes saying, relax, it's just talk. And both sides kind of make sense, depending on how deep you are into wrestling news cycles. But here's the thing, even if this doesn't lead to anything immediate, the fact that it's being discussed at all tells you something important. The wrestling world is always one conversation away from changing direction. One idea. One mention. One what if that suddenly becomes real 6 months later? And if you're AEW, you don't ignore conversations like that. You listen. You think. You imagine. Because that's how momentum builds in this industry. Now I want to throw this out to you watching right now, because I know fans have strong opinions on this. If the New Day walked into AEW tomorrow, would that be the biggest tag team signing in company history, or would it just be another big name joins AEW moment that fades after a few weeks? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this is one of those debates that never really has a calm answer. And if you're enjoying this breakdown so far, don't just sit there silently watching like a backstage cameraman. Hit that like button, because it actually helps more than people think, and subscribe if you're into wrestling stories that go beyond the surface level headlines. There's always something bubbling in this industry, and you don't want to miss it when it explodes. Now back to the situation. Tony Khan's supposed reaction is still the part everyone keeps circling back to. Because whether he said interesting or just stayed quiet and started thinking, that silence says a lot in itself. Sometimes in wrestling, the quiet reactions are the loudest ones later on. And Jon Moxley being in the middle of it just adds another layer of unpredictability. He's not someone who plays PR games. He's not someone who carefully crafts narratives for headlines. He's the kind of guy who says things in a room, and suddenly that room starts echoing those ideas for weeks. So now we're all left with this strange space in between. No confirmation. No denial. Just a name. The New Day, floating in AEW conversations like a possibility nobody saw coming but nobody can fully ignore either. And maybe that's the real story here. Not that it's happening right now, but that it's even something people can picture. Because once wrestling fans start imagining something on a large scale,